Today's daf we're going to learn is Yoma daf Ayin Chet. Today's daf is sponsored by Natasha Shabbat in honor of the second year at site of her father. My teacher, David Ben Shalom Kohen Visara, was a brilliant doctor and a lifelong learner and teacher. He would have been very proud of me taking on the commitment to daf Yomi and very interested to hear all about it. I still want to call him every day to tell him what I've learned in today's daf. I'm going to remind everyone that we have siyums coming up. So number one, we're going to have a siyumim in Israel around the country. They'll be mostly in Hebrew, but I think there might be one or two in English. The details for that and the registration is on the Hebrew side of the site because it's happening in Israel, mostly in Hebrew. So on the Hebrew side of the site, you can register for that. And if you want to come to the English, Zoom, which I hope you're all coming to, that will be on July 11th. The siyumim around the country are happening mostly on Thursday night, maybe Friday and Saturday night in different places, different times, that week of July 8th, 9th, 10th, etc. And July 11th on Sunday, we will have the Zoom in English, the regular Zoom that we normally have. There won't be a regular Zoom in Hebrew, but those who want to Zoom into the Hebrew, we're going to be Zooming the Renana event. It won't be the same kind of, it won't be a Zoom event, but it will be Zoom. And what else? So if you want to register for the Zoom, the regular one in English, you can do that on the website, on the English side of our site, of Hadron's website. Hope you're all coming. Next, so we're going to start, just to review who's speaking, we have Tanya White speaking. She's an excellent educator in the world of more Jewish philosophy. She'll be speaking, and we're going to have Shuli Mishkin, who writes weekly for us. She'll be speaking on the 5 different vantage points of the Siyum, of the Avodat Yom Kippurim, and different issues relating to, right, from a tour guide perspective, from the actual what happened there and where people could see the event from, different places around Har HaBayit. So that's going to be the content. Plus, we're going to have some community speakers as usual. Blessed to have 2 great community speakers this time, and as usual, and we will see you there. Okay, we're going to start now at the bottom of Ayin Zayin Amud Bet. We had gotten from this idea of, can you go in the water to get to your rabbi's house, your father's house, or something important? You can go through water even on Yom Kippur. We're going to get into all sorts of side issues off of this. One side issue we have was, what do you mean? It's dangerous to go in water in general. How can you go in water? Yechezkel was told with this future Nachal, the stream that's going to come out of the Kodesh Kodeshim and spread around Jerusalem and even outside the city. We'll talk about that today. He wasn't allowed to go in once it got up to his neck. It's too dangerous. So then Abai said, oh no, that's water that has rapids in it. That's very dangerous. If it doesn't have rapids, then it's something else. And then of course you can go in. To which we're going to have some more understanding of this Nachal that they talk about, or now they're going to call it a Ma'ayan, a spring that's going to come out from the Holy of Holies. And we're going to kind of again be back in our world of the temple and the different places in the temple. Amar Rabbi Pinchas Mishum Rav Huna Tzipor. A few lines from the bottom of Ayin Zayin Amud Bet. Ma'ayan yotzei mibeit Kodesh HaKodeshim. So this future Ma'ayan that was discussed in Yechezkel, described. B'tchila domeh lekarnei chagavim. We've actually seen all this before. When it first comes out, it's very thin, like the antenna of the grasshoppers. Kevan shegiya lepetach hechal naaseh kechut shel shti. Kevan shegiya le'ulam naaseh kechut shel erev. Like the warp and the woof. So the warp threads are thinner. So when it goes, okay, again, we're going to go from our location, Kodesh Kodeshim to the Hechal, okay, it got a little wider. Kevan shegiu le'ulam, it was already like the Erev, which are thicker threads than the Shti. Kevan shegiu petach azara, when it got to the entrance of the azara, then na'asa kefi pach katan. It was like the opening of a jug, okay, right, where you pour the water from. V'hainu ditnan. This is where we see in the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Mayim mifachim atidim liyot yotzim mitachat mifkan habayit. What is mayim mifachim? What's the root of mifachim? Pach, right? So it's going to be water like a pach, like the opening of the jug. That is going to eventually come out from the tachat mifkan habayit, which they assume is where we're talking about the azara, right? From the threshold of the house. It's by the entrance to the azara. Mikam va'elach, from there, mitgaber va'oleh, gets much, much stronger. Which they say is out of the city of the walled city of Jerusalem. It now gets to the house of Beit David. Now, this doesn't mean obviously David HaMelech, he won't be there, but right, his family or his descendants. Kevan shemigia lepetach Beit David. Now you might be a little surprised what's going to happen with this nachal. Naaseh kenachal shoteh shebo rochatzim zavim v'zavot nidot v'yodot. It becomes this giant mikvah that people use to become pure. Shenemar, how do we know this? Because it says, Yoma makor miftach lebeit David u'liyoshvei Yerushalayim. There will be this water opening that's going to open up in the city, in the house of David, u'liyoshvei Yerushalayim, and for those living in Jerusalem, lechatat v'lenida, will be to cleanse people of sins, right? To basically, well, not exactly cleanse from sins, it's cleanse from impurity. But I think there's this concept here. If you think about this, we have this idea of, right, we're post-temple, in the time of the temple, so it was the Kodesh Kodashim, that was the way that we would get atonement. This is kind of taking something that's coming out of the Kodesh Kodashim. It's going to come all the way outside the technical city of Jerusalem, and there it's going to be, right, a makor of purity, right, which sounds very much like the verses about Yom Kippur. It's called, we'll see this verse later on in this Masechet, about Mikveh Yisrael, Mimah Taharam, and there's this verse that talks about how God is the one who's like a Mikveh Mayim, okay, and he purifies the Jewish people on Yom Kippur. So here we have the same idea that from the Kodesh Kodashim is going to come these purification waters that are going to create purity among the people. Amar Rav Yosef, Mikan Remez Lenida, okay, they're going to get off entirely on something else, which is from here you can learn about a nidah, shetzarich leshev ad savara b'mayim, because the water was so deep, has to be waters that are deep enough that she could sit until her neck under the water, but there's a lot of room for her in the water. But the fact is we don't paskin that way. In other words, he says it seems from here that that's the case, but the Gemara says we don't paskin that way. You don't need to have water that's very deep to go in the mikveh. As long as the woman can put her entire body under the water, that's sufficient. If you remember, we learned 3 cubits by 1 cubit. Right, by 1 cubit is the size. It doesn't have to be that deep, but it has to be deep enough for her whole body to be covered, which doesn't need to be as deep as the way they describe it here. That was an aside we got to because of this idea, can you really go in the water until your neck? Isn't it dangerous? Not even to do with Yom Kippur at all. Now we're back to Yom Kippur, and now we're going to talk about something else, which is really, we're going to move to Shabbat. Tinach Yom Kippur delei kamina. I understand Yom Kippur, it's easy to say you can go through the water because you're not wearing shoes, because you can't wear shoes in Yom Kippur. So we allow you to go through the water because you're not wearing shoes. But Shabbat, but what about Shabbat? Are you allowed to go through water and not have to worry that maybe what will happen with wearing shoes? This brings us back into Masechet Shabbat. There's always this concern with certain items that if there's a concern, they might fall off, or you might take them off by accident. You might end up carrying them. So if you walk through water in shoes, they might end up falling off, or you might take them off because it's uncomfortable to walk in water in shoes. So, right, you go on a hike, right, you get to water, there's always a debate. Do I take off my shoes? Do I leave my shoes on and get my socks all wet? And right, what do I do? So are we concerned with shoes that you might take them off or they might fall off and then you'll end up carrying them? So Amar Nehemiah Chotznei Debei Nesi, in other words, on Yom Kippur, we don't have that issue, not because carrying's not a problem. Carrying is a problem, but you're not wearing shoes. Right? This assumes you're not wearing any shoes. Right? We'll get to exactly today what kind of shoes are actually forbidden. This seems to imply that people really didn't wear shoes on Yom Kippur at all, even ones that weren't made of leather. Amar Nehemiah Chotznei Debei Nesi, okay, he was the son-in-law of the Nasi. Ana Chazite el Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi, I saw them, Dematu or Kamadamaya. They got to a big puddle of water on Shabbat, and they went through wearing exactly what they normally wear, meaning it wasn't a problem to go through with shoes. So they say, okay, tinach minal, fine, I get shoes. Shoes don't really fall off, and likely you're not going to take them off. But sandal, what about a sandal? Sandal, right? You ever try to go in a stream with flip-flops on? They could very easily fall off in the water, right? Usually you go to those hikes where they have streams, and usually you find flip-flops floating in the water because they usually just fall off of someone and then they're taken away and they lose them. So what about those? He says, I saw Ravina, and I want you to remember Ravina. I saw Ravina that he went in wearing clothes, okay, meaning even his sandals. So it seems like Ravina thinks this is allowed, and Rav Chumi bases on Ravina and says yes. Rav Ashi Amar Sandal Lechatchila Lo. Rav Ashi disagrees and says you really shouldn't ideally go in wearing sandalim. Okay, sandals. It's a problem. Now we're going to hear a story, and that's what I wanted you to remember. It was Ravina who they saw going through wearing sandals. Right? So Resh Galuta, the head of the exilarch, I've seen him before. Ika laHagronia lebei Rav Natan. He comes to the city Hagronia and to the house of Rav Natan. Rafram v'kulu Rabbanan atu lepirka. So Rafram and all the rabbis, we'll see why Rafram, because he's going to appear in the story, come to his shiur. He gives a drasha. Ravina lo ata, but Ravina doesn't show up. Now, l'machar bai Rafram la'afuke l'Ravina midate d'reish galuta. There's always one kid in the class that when someone is about to get in trouble, that kid gets up and stands up for everybody and says, oh yeah, don't get that one in trouble. I'll tell you he was this. And they would say, oh yeah, there's the future lawyer, right? The one who's always getting involved in trying to justify what was going on and trying to save people from getting punished. So Rafram is that person. And he says, Ravina is going to get in big trouble with the Reish Galuta for not showing up to his drasha. So when Ravina shows up the next day, he says to him, Amar le, my time alo atamar lepirka. He figures Ravina must have had a good excuse. So he starts asking him, hey, why didn't you come yesterday to the drasha? Figuring he'll give some good excuse and then Reish Galuta won't be upset with him. Amar le, have a kayev le kra'ai. He says, my foot was hurting me. Okay, bit of a lame excuse, right? Your foot was hurting you. So he bayalach lemesam misane. So, Rafram realizes this isn't going to hold any water with the Reish Galuta. So he starts questioning him, but you should have put on shoes. Just because your foot is hurting, you put on shoes and that protects you and you could have come to the shiur. So he says, gava dikara. It was the back of my foot, specifically where the shoe rests, right? That's where the shoe goes. If I put my shoe on, it would have really hurt. He says, well, then you should have worn sandals, right? That could have resolved the issue. Or there was a big puddle in the way. I would have had to walk through the puddle with my sandals on. And right, that's a problem. Now, remember, I told you this before. Ravina was the one who walked through with sandals and didn't think it was a problem. It was Rav Ashi who said it was a problem. She says, well, you should have just gone the way you were dressed. There's no problem with that, with your sandals. Amar le, see, Ravina says to him, Lo savar lamar lahada amar Rav Ashi sandal lechatchila lo. Don't you know that Rav Ashi says, and don't you hold by him, that you can't go in wearing sandals? So he basically gives his answer, which is very strange because he seems to be quoting the other answer and not he himself did. So there's three options of how to resolve what happened here. One option is to say there are two Ravinas. There might be more than three. I'm going to give you three. Ravina, and this comes up somewhere else, that actually when they talk about genealogy, there were two different Ravinas, and maybe that Ravina was not the same Ravina. That's a possibility. Second possibility, he changed his mind. I see, Becky, you're writing that, right? He changed his mind and he decided to hold by Rav Ashi. Third answer, which is maybe the best answer, which is he was just trying to give an excuse, right? Rafram was on his back. I don't know if he realized or not, but anyway, Rafram was trying to help him, but Rafram was also trying to push him to the point where he actually had a good excuse and not a bad excuse. And maybe the Reish Galuta hopefully wouldn't know that Ravina had gone through once. Yes, had gone through wearing sandals. So he was pushed into a corner. He said, oh yeah, there's another opinion. And he says it's forbidden. So anyway, that's our story, okay, in different possible ways to understand it. So this was all a total aside about Shabbat. Is one allowed to go through wearing sandals in water on Shabbat? We saw two different approaches. Even Rav Ashi seems to say it's allowed, but better not to do it. Tana Yehuda bar Grogarot. Okay, this was someone, Yehuda bar Grogarot. He brings a brayta, and the brayta reads as follows: Asur leshev al gabei tina b'yom kippurim. You can't sit on damp clay. Why? Because of rechitza. We're in the topic of rechitza. Washing, we're going to learn now, is not only washing. What's the point of washing? To cool yourself down. Now, you can't wash. You can't do something else that will have the same effect of cooling yourself down. But now we're going to have to see, where do we draw the line? This is something that's a damp cloth, or a damp clay. It has water in it. So because of that, it's similar to washing, even though it's not really. But since there is water, we're going to call that, since you have the same result and you have the water in it, we're going to call that washing. But we're going to see it's not exactly clear, like how damp is the cloth. It has to be very wet clay, not just a little bit damp. And it has to be so wet that if you put something else on it, that would also get wet. Okay, we've seen this term before. and usually comes up in Tuma and Tahara issues, purity and impurity about this. It's something that's so wet that it could get other things wet. Amar Rav Yehuda. Mutar litztanem bepelo. Now we're going to see all different ways that you could cool yourself down that are permitted. You could take fruit, right? You ever do this on the tiyul? You have ice water or cold water, right? And you put it on you to cool yourself off. So the same thing here, right? You could take fruits and use that. Rav Yehuda mitztanem bekara. He would use a gourd. Okay, apparently they must have, held the cold inside. Rabba mitztanem biyanuka. He would use a child. That's very weird, a young child. Some people say, well, young children, you're allowed to bathe. We'll see that later today. And therefore, maybe they were cool already from bathing, and then they would cool off using the cool child. Some people say yanuka is actually a tall glass with a very long stem, and something about it reminds us of a child. I don't know, and therefore it's called a yanuka, and it has nothing. It means like a cup with water in it that would cool you down. And we're going to see that the next one is like that. Rabba mitzanem bekasa dekasti. You would use a silver cup, right? This is like taking something that it will keep the cold in, right? So therefore you use a metal, right? A metal kind of cup. Amar Papa, kasa dekaspa male asur aser shar. Only if it's full, if it's full, it's actually forbidden. Only if it's partially empty, then you can use it. But if it's full of water, there's a concern that you might come to wash your hands. I was thinking about this, that we're so used to washing, right? If you think about it, when we use a sink, right, on Yom Kippur, we wash our fingertips, right? You can wash the tips of your fingers, but you can't wash the rest of your hand. Now, how many times right? There's always that concern. You're so used to washing your hands that you might accidentally wash your whole hand. There's always a concern of that. So here also, I think that if you take a full cup and you're using it to cool down, you might accidentally, you're so used to using the cup to wash your hands, but maybe that's how they wash their hands. Therefore, there's more of a concern that you might actually use it. You might actually wash. Depachra, if you use a ceramic bowl or a cup, idi v'idi asur, even if it's only half full, because there, mishum demishchal shakir, the water seeps out the sides. So because the water gets absorbed into the walls of the kli, of the utensil, and then it goes out the other end, and then you will get wet. Rav Ashi, most notes on the side say to change it from Rav Papa to Rav Ashi, Amal, kasa de kaspa chaser nami asur. Even a silver cup, a goblet, which is mostly empty, is still forbidden, mishum de mizdere, because it could slip and the water could spill, and then you'll end up washing your hand. Right? This is how far do we have to go, okay, to be concerned that maybe we'll end up washing. And on the other hand, they're trying to come up with ways that we could achieve the results of cooling ourselves down that just don't involve water in any way. If they don't involve water in any way, then it's okay. If it involves something that's wet, it's more of a problem. Although we'll see that maybe there are some ways where one can do that. Ze'eri bar Chama, ushbezichnin de Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi v'Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, udukulu Rabbanit de Kesri Havi. He was the host of all these people that came to him. Amar leila Rabbi Yosef b'Rei Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. He says to Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Bar Arya, you're the son of a lion. Ta'emalach milta ma'aliyata David avid avucha. I'm going to tell you something really great that your father would do. He had a cloth, an Erev Yom Kippur, and he would soak it in water. He would squeeze out all the extra water, so he would have this damp cloth. The next morning, he would use it to wash his face, his hands, and his feet. Then he had this damp cloth from the day before that was able to be used. Erev Tisha B'Av. On Tisha B'Av, now, what's the difference between Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur? There's two main differences. One difference is Tisha B'Av, it's not a sort of malacha, regular, right, things that you can't do on Shabbat, you can do on Tisha B'Av. So what's the issue here? Well, with water, there's a problem to squeeze out water. You can't use something that's waterlogged because on Shabbat, you might squeeze it. It's a tolada of dash. It's an outgrowth of the malacha of threshing, where you take something out from inside. So it's like squeezing the water from out of wherever it's from the cloth it's in. So that's forbidden both on Yom Kippur and Shabbat, but it's not forbidden on Tisha B'Av. Another difference between them is that Tisha B'Av is all about Avelu. It's about mourning and mourning practices. If you think about it, the 9 days, you can't even wash rechitza shel ta'anug, right? You're not supposed to swim. You're not supposed to take hot showers. It's all, rechitza is a very central issue, not just in Tisha B'Av, but the 9 days leading up to it. Whereas Yom Kippur, there's no mourning. Yes, you're not supposed to have, it's Inoi, but it's not mourning. So maybe Tisha B'Av to a certain extent would be more strict. So we're going to start with the approach that Yom Kippur is more strict because of the squeezing, but later at the end, we're going to mention possibility that maybe one would think that Tisha B'Av is more strict. So now we have this, what would he do? On Tisha B'Av, shoreo tabimayim, and he wouldn't squeeze it out at all. He'd have it really waterlogged. Ulemachar ma'viral gabei einav, and then he would use it to wipe his eyes in the morning of Tisha B'Av. V'chein ki ata Rabba bar Meri amar, when Rabba bar Meri came, he also said, Be'erev Tisha B'Av mevi'in lo mitzpachat v'shoreo tabimayim, u'menichat tachat meroshotav, he adds one more thing, he would put it under his pillow so that it wouldn't be exposed to air and it wouldn't dry out overnight. I think this, whether he puts it on his eyes or his hands and his face, I don't think it makes a difference. I think they're just saying this is what he had done, but really you could do either. The Erev Yom Kippurim, an Erev Yom Kippur, and the same thing he would do on Erev Yom Kippur, right, as Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi did. So we basically have these two parallel stories of people who did the same thing. Amalei Rabbi Yaakov to Rabbi Yirmiyah. Yaakov says to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa, to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa, Ibcha Amartlan ve'utvinach schita. You actually told us the opposite, he says to him. You tried to make a claim that Tisha B'Av is more strict because of the reasons I said, because Tisha B'Av, right, is more strict because you really can't wash it all. So there you have to wring it out. On Yom Kippur, you can use it even if it's still wet. But Utvinach, we contradicted what you said and brought up the issue of schita, which is asur, an isra malacha on Yom Kippur, and then obviously it must be the reverse. Okay, you must have gotten it wrong. Amar Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa, Amar Rav Amram, Amar Rav Bar Chana. Okay, they said, pass this down. That Shalu et Rabbi Elazar, they asked Rabbi Elazar, Zaken or Rabbi Eliezer, I'm not sure which, I think it's Rabbi Elazar. Zaken v'yasher. Okay, before we get to this, I have to give you some background, which is right now we're talking about something totally disconnected. The reason why we're bringing this up, could be more reasons, but the reason technically in the Gemara that it's brought up is because they're going to ask Rabbi Elazar two questions. The second one is going to be about shoes and what shoes you can wear in Yom Kippur. The first one is going to be about something totally different, about Bechorot, okay? So, and about the Nasi. So let's start reading and then we'll give you the background that you need to understand this. So he says, they asked Rabbi Elazar, Zaken v'yoshev v'yeshiva tzarich litol reshut lahatir bechorot or eno tzarich. Let's talk about what a bechor is. Bechor is a firstborn animal. Firstborn animals go to the Kohen. You have to give it to a Kohen. What's the Kohen supposed to do with it? In the times of the temple, he's supposed to offer it as a sacrifice, and then he can eat the meat. But if there's no temple, or if for some reason it has a blemish, then in the time of the temple, if it has a blemish, you can't bring it as a sacrifice, so the Kohen's allowed to eat it. When it's not the time of the temple and there are no sacrifices, the Kohen has to wait till it gets blemished. Okay, I mentioned this the other day, that there's this famous story of this very old, I think it was a goat maybe, that wasn't blemished, and they tried to get a non-Jew to put a blemish on it because you can't put a blemish on it on purpose. And this goat was just being wasted. No one could do anything with it. And the Kohen was just waiting forever for it to get used. So it creates a bit of a problem here. And because of that, people are very suspect that they're going, Lahatir Bechor is an issue where somebody comes along and says, this is enough of a blemish that the Kohen can now eat it. And you also have to prove that the blemish wasn't inflicted by a person and it came naturally. Because if it was inflicted by a person, that doesn't help you. So the question is, who can rule on this kind of issue? And there's this issue of respect for the Nasi, for the head. Do you have to ask Reshut from the Nasi to be able to rule on this or not? Okay, so if you're a Zaken v'yoshev b'yeshiva, if you're already in the Sanhedrin, let's say, you're one of the judges, are you allowed to rule on this case? Or, right, they ask, do you need to ask Reshut, Reshut from the Nasi, Latir B'chorot or eno tzarich? There was this added issue of respect that anyone who wanted to be a person who can matir b'chorim had to go to the Nasi. The question is, what if you're already like a big, certain high level, do you also have to go and ask or not for permission? So they say, "My kamibayli." What really was the question? They say, "Hachi kamibayli." This was something they gave the house of the Nasi in order that they had to. Sometimes you create things so that those people are able to command a certain amount of respect. So when they did that, the question is, right? Since that's the case, tzarich litol reshut. So therefore, everyone needs to. Oh, Dilma, or maybe this person's on a high enough level that he's not part of that thing that they instituted that people have to ask permission from the Nasi. right? If you're a lower level court judge, then you would have to ask. If you're already at this higher level, maybe you don't. He stood up and he said, אני ראיתי את רבי יוסי בן זמרה, שזקן ויושב בישיבה היה, ועמד במעלה מזקנו של זה, ונטל רשות להתיר בפרעה. I saw him, he was a pretty big important person, and he asked for permission, so therefore it must be even they need to ask for permission. אמר לי רבי אבא, לא כך היה מעשה, אלא כך היה מעשה. You messed up the case. That wasn't the situation. It wasn't an issue. When he asked for permission from the Nasi, it wasn't because he was asking permission. And it shows, even though he was an important, prominent person, he still needed to ask permission. And then it answers our question. No, it's a totally different story. Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra Kohen Haya. He was a Kohen. Now, there's an issue with Kohanim ruling on these cases because they're suspect that they're going to rule, right, in favor of their own, right, their own people, themselves, etc. The Hachi Kamet Baile, and this was the question. Halacha ki Rabbi Meir de Amar Chashuv b'davar lo dano v'lo mi'ido. Do we hold like Rabbi Meir, who said in a different case that if you're suspect of you did some sin, let's say, you're known to not be so careful about certain things, are you allowed to judge someone else about something like that or testify about someone else? Or do we just assume since you don't care, take it so seriously, therefore you're not trusted for that issue? Odilma Rabbi ben Gamliel, and he says, according to Rabbi Meir, if you're suspect for something, yeah, Kohanim were all known to be suspicious about Bechol, because they always wanted to permit their becholim, so therefore all Kohanim were suspicious. So if we hold like Rabbi Meir, that if you're suspicious about something, lo dam v'lo mi'ido, then you can't even rule about this at all. O dilma halakha ke Rabbi ben Gamliel d'amar ne'emanu al shel chavero ve'eno ne'emanu al shel atzmo. Rabbi ben Gamliel says if you're suspect about something, then you can't testify when it relates to you, but you can about somebody else. So therefore, what Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra was when he went to ask permission was, because I'm a Kohen, am I forbidden to rule on becholim entirely? Or can I rule on them for other people, just not for myself? So that was what he asked. Upashatle, and what answer did he get from the Nasi? He was told, halacha ke Rashbag. The halacha is like Rashbag, and you can rule on these topics. Okay, that was the first question. Again, it seemingly has nothing to do with our case. On the other hand, it does a little bit have to do with Kohanim, and right, that there's all sorts of situations, even though Kohanim was supposedly in a different, level, they're in a hierarchy in society. Kohanim are always at the top. On the other hand, the Gemara does not hesitate to raise all sorts of doubts about places where Kohanim would be suspicious of various things, whether it be jealousy in the Beit HaMikdash, whether it be right here, specifically talking about the issue of the mum and the blemish and the animals, and that because of their money situation and they're wanting to use their animals and to eat them, they basically were trying to come up with ways that they could permit the cholot, and therefore they're suspect about those issues. But in the end, we allow Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra to judge other people, just not when it relates to his own animals. Now, again, why did we bring this technically speaking in the Gemara? Because the second question in this occurrence, when they asked Rabbi Elazar the following questions, they also asked him, the two come by, Ma'u latzeit sandal shel sham b'yom kippurim. Can you wear a sandal made of cork? Okay, now we're going to get into different materials and our shoes. I mentioned to you before that there's different sources about this, right? We know that la halacha, you can't wear leather shoes. Here the Gemara is going to raise all sorts of other types of shoes. So can you wear cork shoes on Yom Kippur? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani al Raglav, right? We had this just a minute ago. Rabbi Tzadok ben Chaluka Amar al Raglav, here also Amar al Raglav. You think about, we had this, the Nida Yeshiva, right? She sits in the Yoshvei Yerushalayim. Anyway, there's a lot of Yeshiva and Amidah here in today's daf. He gets up on his feet. Amar, Ani ra'iti et Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. The other thing, by the way, that we have a lot in today's daf is testimonials about people and things we've seen people do and how much we can learn from what we see people do, right? We had this issue because Ravina, we saw him do something. On the other hand, he said something else. So sometimes hearing what somebody says seeing is not always the same as. And also we can sometimes misread a situation, right? Like this happened. They saw him and then they said, oh, that wasn't what was going on. When he asked the Nasi, he was actually asking him something else. But you also see the issues and the complications. When you see someone do something, you might not actually see the whole picture. Anyway, he says, I saw Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi that Yatsa b'sandal shel sham b'yom kippurim. I saw him wearing cork shoes on Yom Kippur. This is why they say, right, rabbis or community people always have to be very careful because whatever they do, people will see and comment about it and talk about it and learn from it, right? So you have to be careful. So I saw him walking out with cork shoes, which seems to indicate it's fine. V'amina lehu, and then I said, Amina le, I said to him, B'tanit tzibor mai. Is it the same halacha for a regular fast day? Now, what's a regular fast day? Not a fast day like yesterday, like Shavasar B'Tammuz, but fast days that were instituted for if there was no rain. There would be a slew of fast days, and this would kind of develop over time, where the first three were less severe, and as you got farther on and there was still no rain, they would add more stringencies. So Tanit Tzibor Mai. Now they're all rabbinic in nature, so they're going to be more lenient. On the other hand, maybe they're going to be more strict because there's this concept of Chachamim asu chizuk l'divreihem yoter mishal Torah. Sometimes the rabbis have to strengthen the Rabbanans, rabbinic things, because people won't take them so seriously. So he's saying maybe since on Taniot Tzibor that are the more severe level, the ones that happen later on, when there's been a drought for a long time. So those, when you're not allowed to wear shoes, does that include cork shoes as well? Right? Maybe there we'd be more strict than Yom Kippur because of that principle. Amar li lo shnas. He said to me, no, there's no difference. You could wear them also then. Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, another testimonial. Ani ra'iti et Rabbi Elazar de Ninve, she'yatza b'sandal shasham b'tanit tzibor. I also saw Rabbi Elazar of Ninve wearing cork shoes on a fast day, not on Yom Kippur. And I said to him, by the way, these stories are good stories because there was a conversation. It wasn't just they saw him do it, but then they asked him a question, so it's clear what he holds, and it wasn't just a mistake in what they saw. And I said to him, right now the question is going to be the reverse. But Yom Kippurim, right? Yom Kippurim, the gist of this question is Yom Kippur is more severe because it's Doraita, it's from the Torah. So he says, Amar li lo shnan. He said there's no difference. Also on Yom Kippur you can wear cork shoes. So far we've seen no problem with cork shoes. Rabbi Yehuda Nafik b'derechitne, he walked out with shoes that were rechitne. 3 different opinions I saw at least about what this is. Some people say it's reed. That's Rashi. No, Rashi says it's a type of cork. Okay. Another opinion says it's, Rabbeinu Eliakim says it's reed, like straw. And the Aruch, which is an early dictionary, says that it's wool. Okay. So some sort of, we don't really know, but some sort of shoe made of another material. Abayi Nafik b'dehutze, with shoes made of palm fibers. Rava Nafik b'diyavle, made of grass. Okay. Or something that's maybe this is also like reeds. So again, all these rabbis going out wearing shoes, right? They all wore shoes, just not, the one that's really missing here is leather. Also, if you notice, wood is missing. Now we're going to see another thing about that in a minute. Rabba bar Rav Huna karat sudra akare v'nafik, he put a cloth around his leg and walked out with that. Mativ Rami bar Chama. So Rami bar Chama now brings a question, and it's going to start off an issue about Shabbat and going to get to Yom Kippur. Hakitea yotze b'kav shelo divrei Rami Meir. Someone who has a prosthetic leg, is he allowed to walk with it on Shabbat, go out into the public domain? Because maybe he'll take it off and carry it. So Rabbi Meir says, no problem. He can walk out with a prosthetic leg, not an issue. Rabbi Yossi says you can't because he's worried you might carry it for Amod and Rashid Rabin. You might take it off. Vitane Allah, but there's a braita on this Mishnah. I think it's a Mishnah. It's a braita on this source that says, V'shavim sh'asur l'tzeipo b'yom kippurim. They all agree, though, that you can't wear this wooden leg on Yom Kippur. Now, why can't you wear a wooden leg on Yom Kippur? Amar Abaye, hatam de'ipek. Okay, so now it seems like the issue is, this is going to be mati. This was brought as a mati of Rami bar Chama. This is a question. Sounds like you can't wear wood shoes, right? That it's a shoe. It's kind of viewed as a shoe, this prosthetic leg. So he says there, this seems to contradict what we said. All these rabbis walked out in all these other types of shoes. It's not a problem. So Amar Abaye, hatam de'ipe ketitin umishum ta'anug. That's a case where you had material, you put like a kind of cloth in between your leg and the prosthetic leg, the stump that you have in your leg and the prosthetic leg to make it more comfortable. That's forbidden on Yom Kippur for other reasons, because of ta'anug, because of you can't enjoy, you can't have pleasurable things. You're supposed to suffer. I know you're probably already thinking, what are you talking about? We said that's not included in suffering. So let's try to figure that out. So Armalei Rav. First he says, Ilav manahu. If you think that this isn't a kli at all, right? There's a whole question. Is this a kli? Is it not a kli? We're going to get to that soon. Ketitim mishavalei mana. You think because you put these in, it's going to be a kli, and then it's kind of something that you're going to say it's a kli that you're benefiting from. That's number one. Ve'od, number two. Kol ta'anug delav min alu b'yom kippur mi asur. Any pleasure that's not shoes Nobody forbids that. We didn't say it's forbidden to wear a shirt that's comfortable for you or something, right? Nobody says that. We see that Rabba Bar Huna put a cloth around his leg and went out like that. So the katitin shouldn't be, right? That was pleasurable. It protected his foot. This also should be able to protect him. So it shouldn't be a problem. And furthermore, Rabba really doesn't like this answer. He has a lot of questions. The second part of that source says, if it has an area at the top of the leg which kind of holds these cloths that you put in, then it's already a kli and it's considered something that can become impure, which means that if it only mentions the katitin later on in the source, michlal, from there you can infer that the first part was not talking about katitin. So you can't say that that's the case. Ella Amar Rava, so Rava basically says it can't be that this all has to do with tanug and we're not talking about shoes. No. Rava says, La'olam dekule alma min alhu. It really, everybody thinks that this is a shoe, in which case it would be usher to wear shoes on Yom Kippur, even if they're made of wood. But on Shabbat, the machloket is, and this is what I said earlier, it's a whole machloket. Are we worried you're going to carry it for Amod and Rishon Arabim or not? And then the issue on Yom Kippur becomes the issue of, can you wear a wooden shoe? We have a bit of a problem because this seems to indicate that Rava holds shoes are forbidden here if they're made of other materials. And earlier, Rava was one of the people listed as saying that you can wear a shoe made of yavle, which are the asavim. So how is this different from sha'am, and how do we resolve this? So first of all, some people say the Rava there is really Rabba and not Rava, which happens a lot, and it's not the same person. Again, this is like the Ravina and the Ravina. You could say that that there's different opinions about it, and that some people say that a shoe of wood would be usher, and this seems to indicate that. Or it could be that Rav is just explaining how that source said that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi agree about that, but maybe he doesn't hold that way. It's another possibility. La halacha, as you know, we hold that it's only leather shoes. It's not other shoes. If it's a wooden shoe, if it has leather on it, it would be a problem, but not if it's just a wooden shoe. However, the Mishnah Berurah, just so you know, in case you didn't know this, does quote some achronim who hold that any kind of shoe is forbidden to wear in Yom Kippur. So there are people who actually think, and based on it all comes out from our sugya, which is what makes it interesting, because our sugya is really not so clear in which direction we go based on Rava's answer here. And it seems like maybe other shoes really are forbidden. So there are achronim who hold that way, right? But most people don't paskin like that. Next, Tanu Rabbanan, new topic. It's still connected to our Hamishayim Yuyim. Now we're going to talk about children. Tinokot, right? Babies or young children. Mutarim bekulan. You can wash them, you can put oil on them, whatever you need. Chutz minilata sandal, other than shoes, right? We know this, we're very careful. Kids don't wear leather shoes either, even when they're little. So the question is, mai shnani lata sandal, right? And they're going to ask it kind of like, I don't get it, because you would think it's different because of this, but it doesn't make sense. So mai shnani lata sandal, the amre inashe abdule. People will say, it's because you put it on them. Now, there's an issue. Children are not chayav in mitzvah, but you can't do something to a child that's forbidden. For example, you can't feed a child non-kosher food. Right? The child, right, isn't chayav in mitzvah. And theoretically, if they ate non-kosher food, it wouldn't be a problem. But you can't feed them non-kosher food. And that comes from a pasuk that says lo toflum, about non-kosher food. But they read it as lo ta'achilum, don't feed them. Right? Lo toflum means don't eat them. But lo ta'achilum means, right, which is the same letters, just different vowels, don't feed them. So you can't feed children non-kosher food. And from here, we learn about all other things. So therefore, it's going to look like you did it to them. Because how else do they get their shoes on? Little kids can't put their shoes on. So now they say, but hanaknami amre inashe avdule. People will also say, you wash them, you put oil on them. People will see they're all nice and clean. So no, it could look like maybe you bathed them yesterday before Yom Kippur. The fact that we see them today and they're all clean, they could still be clean from yesterday. Sandal nami. But we could throw that question back on the sandal question. You could say, you put the shoe on them yesterday before Yom Kippur. So sandalo efshar de me'etmol avdile. You can't possibly have worn the sandals overnight. Why? It's an interesting halacha. Whether you call it halacha or not is a good question. If you want to taste the taste of death, put your shoes on and go to sleep. In other words, he was trying to deter people from going to sleep in shoes. I don't know if he would disagree on an airplane or not, whether maybe you could sleep like that. But basically, right, normally we don't sleep in shoes other than maybe on an airplane. I mean, most of us take off our shoes anyway on airplanes, but he's trying to think of a situation where you sleep with your shoes. He thinks that sleeping with your shoes is bad, right? It maybe is like you're barely going to sleep. It's like sleeping on the couch, right? You're not really, right? This goes on in my house all the time. I always say to the kids, don't sleep on the couch, go to your bed, go to sleep properly, right? And it could be that Shmuel was trying to deter people. He also, by the way, was a doctor. Could be he had like a health, he felt like it's appropriate for you to sleep in your bed. So he said it in the terminology of, we see this, if you want to taste the taste of death, sleep in your shoes. So obviously people aren't putting their kids to sleep with their shoes on. So when you see them wearing the shoes the next morning, you know they put them on in the morning. So that's why. Whereas it wouldn't be the same for other things. So now they say, wait a minute. But it says that all the other things are mutarim lechatchila. Now, if it sounds like you could do it on Yom Kippur, even if you did it on Yom Kippur, it would be kind of noticeable. If the kids, looks freshly washed, you really could tell the difference. So how do we allow it? So now he gives a whole different reason. It's not because of what people will see. It's hanaf delav leriditayu gazrina be'Rabbanit. Hanaf deriditayu hu lo gazru be'Rabbanit. There's a difference between things that children need to grow. They believe that you need to get washed every day. You need to get anointed and put oils on every day in order to help with the growth process. Whereas, or maybe it's sort of health growth, something like that. Whereas when it comes to shoes, you definitely don't need them. Okay. And therefore they allow what was necessary to allow and not what wasn't necessary. To Amar Abai, and how do we know that this is something that helps children grow? Because Abai said, Amar li'ain, he always says, my mother told me, which is really his nursemaid told him, Revite dianuka maya chamime umishcha. What helps a child grow is hot water and oils. Gadol porta, when he gets a little older, be'ata bekutra, egg in kuta. Gadol porta, when he grows a little more, tabure mani, he needs to break plates, okay, break dishes, just like get out his aggression. He would buy, Rabbi would buy broken utensils so his child could break those. He didn't want to buy whole utensils, that would be destructive, but if they're already broken, he would buy them so his child could throw them, kind of get out his aggressions. Last part for today. We saw these exceptions to the rule in the Mishnah of people who could wash. So matnitim mane, we're now going to see not everybody agrees with this. Our Mishnah holds like Rabbi Hananya ben Chadyon. Tanya, as it says in the Braita, Melech v'Kala lo yirchatzu apneihem. According to Tanakama, they can't. Rabbi Hananya ben Chadyon omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, Melech v'Kala yirchatzu apneihem. He says they can. Hachaya lo tinolet hasandal. So according to Tanakama, a pregnant woman is not allowed to, or a woman who gave birth is not allowed to wear shoes. Rabbi Hananya ben Chadon omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, Hachaya tinolet hasandal. She can wear shoes. So here you see, our Mishnah was Rabbi Hananya ben Chadon. My time melech. What's the reason? You're always supposed to see a king in his glory. Kala, my timer, so she'll be beloved by her husband, and he won't see her as something ugly. Amar le Rabbi Chia, Kala ad kama, how long? Amar le chedetanya emonim tachshitim and akala kol shloshim yom. You can't prevent her from wearing jewelry or perfumes for the first 30 days. This is a case of if she's in avelut, if her mother dies right by the wedding. So she's allowed to still for 30 days put on things that normally you wouldn't allow someone who is mourning for her mother to do. We're worried she's going to get a cold. If there's fear of a scorpion, then you're allowed to. To which some of them first would say, what do you mean? Of course you can. Why do you even need to tell us? This is pikuach nefesh. So they say maybe it's a scorpion that's not life-threatening, but still you're allowed to wear shoes to prevent yourself from, let's say, stepping on a scorpion. Okay, that's it for today. So we've seen a bunch of exceptions. We're really in the topic of all sorts of exceptions to the rules of Rechitza, Sichan, Yilatza, Sandal, etc. And we saw about children and how do they factor in, what types of shoes, could you go through water for various reasons. That's a quick sum up of what we did. Have a great day.